Welcome to Public Affairs Roundtable, a discussion of current events in the nation and around the world and how they affect the people of Indiana. Here's your moderator, Larry Lough.
We've come a long way, baby, but baby, we've still got a long ways to go. That might well be the theme of the civil rights movement in these United States. In 1989, we will mark the 25th anniversary of Dr. Martin Luther King picking up the Nobel Peace Prize, 25 years since Lyndon Johnson signed landmark civil rights legislation. Today on Public Affairs Roundtable, we'll talk about how far we've come and where we are in terms of race relations in America. Our panelists today are John Rouse, our executive producer for this program and a member of the political science faculty at Ball State University; Charles Payne, a professor of secondary education at Ball State and director of the multicultural program; Cynthia Pierce, who is a project manager with the Muncie Housing Authority; and Fred Williams, assistant director of minority student development at Ball State. John, I guess the basic question as we look at ourselves 25 years later, 25 years after the Civil Rights Act of 1964, are we still living in a racist America?
Well, let me answer it this way. America is certainly racial. If we look at our history was formed in terms of slavery, in terms of blacks being worth three-fifths of a person as far as the Constitution is concerned. So race has been very much a part of our history. Yes, I think we're racist. I mean, in the sense that people are anti-black. They're also anti-Jewish. They're also anti-Oriental. But the question in America is, do blacks or do Orientals or do Jews have something to sell? The issue is being able or having the opportunity to sell or to market ourselves in terms of what we have to offer. Blacks have not had that opportunity. The historical experience of blacks in this country is very different than the other two groups that I mentioned. So in that sense, yes, America is racist, but America at the very element is racial because of our makeup, our population, our history. So in that sense, I think America is indeed racist.
Fred Williams, we look at the 1960s, we look at the 1980s, we say, my gosh, we've come a long way. True or false?
We have in a lot of regards. We've made a lot of strides in terms of race relations and segregation and that kind of thing, and integration, the busing and all that. But it's funny how the more things change, the more they stay the same. And it's unfortunate that in our society that we've made such tremendous strides towards trying to improve race relations, but in actuality, a lot of the same kinds of activities are still existing as far as the treatment of blacks. Now, as far as opportunities and being able to let's say, better ourselves and make something of ourselves, in that regard, yes, the doors have been opened, but in the general society, blacks are still looked at in an inferior manner. And there are times when we feel that we're being, let's say, treated no differently than we did back in the 60s. It's kind of disheartening, but as my mother used to say, it ain't easy being black. So you just come to accept some things and you try to do the best you can.
Charles, you grew up in Mississippi, Philadelphia, Mississippi. People in the North think that that's a Southern problem, that racism is a Southern phenomenon. In fact, that there's not racism in the North, or our attitudes are different. Is that true?
No, as a matter of fact, growing up in Philadelphia, Mississippi, we also felt as though racism was in the South, and that if we could just get north, like Muncie, Gary, all of our problems would be solved. So I think there's a real misconception of what it is. One of the differences that I've noticed is that in the South, whites and blacks had contact with each other constantly. I mean, in neighborhoods, in work relationships, and the thing that amazed me when I first began to come north was the isolation of the groups from each other, such that in Indianapolis, as an example, in Muncie, as an example, you could say that there's no racism here. It's because of where they live. It's because of the boundary, not realizing that it's racism that set those boundaries. And so I found that Southerners tended to know much more of what they did and why they did it than Northerners. A lot of Northerners who really can get frustrated with you when you talk about racism because in their minds it doesn't exist. It's been moved back. Whereas in the South, you could tell a guy that, he'd say, yeah, I don't like you. Yeah.
Well, you're looking at me.
You from South Carolina, so. Yeah. No, but I'm just saying, well, that was my experience in the South.
Cynthia, do you see that separation?
Yes, I can see it. I've always grown up here in Muncie. I've lived other places when I was younger because my family, my dad was in the service, but I can see, I was always able to see the separation, being in the school system here, then living after I left home and being on my own. I could always tell there was a difference between being the blacks and the whites. There's always been an invisible line, but it's a visible line if you're black in Muncie.
Whose job is it to break down that barrier? If it has not been done in 25 years, if it has not been in 200 years, whose job is it? Does it fall with government, which has enacts civil rights legislation? Does it fall with schools? Does it fall with parents at home? Whose job is it, Charles?
I think it's a combination of all of those things. I think it's parents, it's churches, political leaders, but I would say political leaders have a major stake in what's going on. If you just look right now, President-elect Bush said he wanted a gentler, kinder America. And look how quick other people have picked up on that. And I've heard that word, somebody in Indianapolis use that expression. So I think that our political leaders do set the tone for this. I think religious leaders also set the tone for this, and as well as at homes, we have to do a lot with it as well. It seems to me right now the responsibility has been given primarily to schools, though.
A lot of things have been given to schools, right?
Yeah, and when schools get too good at it, we get in trouble.
Mm-hmm. Larry, I think one point that Charles raised is the issue of economics and politics and race. You have to ask the question, did blacks leave the South because of the racist activities in politics by the Bull Connors? The answer is no. Blacks left the South, came to Gary, came to Chicago because cotton went under and mechanism or technology took over, and there was nothing for blacks to do, and they were forced to leave because there were no jobs. Mm-hmm. So it's the question of is it economics or is it politics? A second question you can ask, are blacks poor or are they disadvantaged because they're black or because they haven't had opportunity? The answer has to be a combination of the two, but the real answer, it would seem to me, is that they have not had economic opportunity. Once blacks or any other group, Jews or Orientals, have economic opportunity, they can achieve like everybody else.
Yeah, that's the dangerous situation that we're living in right now, because, see, back in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, families could pack up and move north from down south, and you could get a job in the steel mill or the automobile industry or somewhere and make a living for you and your family. But see, the days of just going out and getting yourself a job at a factory are gone. And let's face it, we live in a high-tech society. And if you don't have educational training and some kind of background in skill development, you're going to be left on the wayside. And as a result, systematically, minorities and blacks in particular, if we don't have the opportunity to go to school, go to college, improve our skills, we're going to run into a lot of problems. And that's why now more than ever, education is more important. And unfortunately, it's even more difficult now to get in school than it was 20 years ago. You know?
Yeah, I've wondered in my own mind, while I personally believe in the concept of integration, growing up in the South in the late 40s and early 50s, I believe in desegregation, integration, but I'm beginning to question the process of integration now myself. As you mentioned, Jews, Japanese, and other groups. If you look at the models of integration, of integrating different groups in society, blacks were done differently. We were, in a sense, kind of picked up and diffused out into the society, into the red, whereas the other groups kind of had to live within their own communities. They had to develop self-help. They had to learn to depend on themselves, to develop businesses for themselves and that sort of thing. And I kind of wonder if the do-gooders attempt really is working against us, because in a sense it divided us, because they took the best of the black inner communities, in effect, and put them out in suburbs. And they left the black communities that really without a role model, without real leaders. I'm beginning to question that whole problem. Was that the right way to go? I believe in the concept of what we were after. I'm not so sure I agree with the process now. I'm beginning to have some questions about that.
The intent was good.
Right,
The intent good,
right.
but the results was a
may
problem.
not, right, yeah.
Cynthia, if I could ask you a question, you know, one person who's been very active in the black movement over the years has been Shirley Chisholm.
Mm-hmm.
So the observation I have is that black women especially have suffered, it seems to me, because, I mean, not only have black men suffered, but especially have black women suffered in terms of opportunities. Do you think that's changing?
It goes back, you can say on some, as you look back through history, you can see where there have been various opportunities made available for women. But then on the other hand, you can say that black women as a whole have had a heavy burden to bear. We have had a lot of doors open for us so that we can step forward to do a few more things to better ourselves. But as a whole, I would have to say that there are so many other obstacles in our society that unless someone gives you an opportunity, a lot of times that, you know, everyone doesn't always find an opportunity to get through that door. Everybody doesn't always find someone who can help them unless you have someone else, you know, regardless of your educational or background or whatever, you still need to have someone else kind of pulling and tugging you along a lot of times because of the fact that things have not changed that much. It's still a hard struggle.
Yeah, you know, it's, you know, since Charlie has identified me as a white Southerner, you know, let me say in terms of, in terms of my experience of growing up in the South, the things that impacted me because I came along in the 1960s, first of all was when I saw the old slave market in Charleston, South Carolina. White Americans do not realize what slavery did to families, black families in this country. And the second thing in terms of my early on experience was I actually saw a white man tell a black man he could not get a drink of water. Now, I was 15 years of age, but that had a tremendous impact upon me as a kid saying, hey, why shouldn't anybody be able to have a drink of water? So the point I think you make, Cynthia, is a very good one. What slavery or the history of slavery has done to black families.
Yeah, I think, you know, in education, this is the thing that I try to stress there, is that people don't realize how long it takes to destroy a culture, a group of people. And it seems to me that just as blacks, as we get to the threshold, it seems to me that it finally caught up with us in terms of the dehumanization type of thing. And so, again, that's why I'm questioning whether the ones of us who've gotten education, if in fact we should have left the black community, somebody probably needs to make that sacrifice to build that solid base, that foundation, as you find, I think, in some of the old Jewish communities, some of the Irish communities, the Italian communities. The first educators didn't leave; they stayed there and formed the base. It was the other ones that went out from that. And so I think that slavery, maybe the effects of slavery and the whole slave mentality is really just now beginning to really catch up with us in terms of how it's destroyed our attitudes toward each other and the family.
Is it important to reestablish that link between the black community and those who have basically left?
Oh, I think so.
How do you do it?
I personally try to do it by going back and trying to participate in the community.
One thing, when you're talking about the blacks that are still caught up in something that they really are having difficulty getting out of, and then as opposed to the blacks that are able to get out of that and do better for themselves, move to the suburbs, I think black people as a whole have a responsibility to other blacks. You know, sure, you can look at education, sure, a lot of people can say, well, I did a lot of things on my own, but in essence, it took a lot of sacrifices throughout, you know, years for a black to even be able to make that move into the suburb regions. And it took, we talk about hundreds of years ago, and we talk about things as they relate to us now, and a lot of those things are still the same. And black people can't forget, as a whole, our heritage there. And we do have obligations as black people to help one another out. That could go both ways. You could say, well, Some people don't want that help. You could say that, but unless people take a stand to say, well, this is what I'm going to do. I have an obligation. I need to do this. I need to do that. Unless we, as a people, as a Black people, can do that for one another, then we can reach that community a whole lot better than you could, because that's our roots. That Black community is where we all come from. So I feel as if you move out of the Black neighborhood, fine, that's fine and dandy, but we still can't move and leave behind us people that still need our help, people who we have an obligation to.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think also then this is where Blacks also become Americans, because at the same time, while we have a sense of Blackness, we're also American in the sense that we become individualistic too.
Mm-hmm. You know, you mentioned earlier, Charles, about culture, and it's funny because, in my opinion, in America, we really don't have a culture here. When I say a culture, an American culture, because let's face it, America is made up of a lot of different ethnic groups who have their own cultures. You know, we have people that came from England, people that came from Germany, people that came from Spain or wherever, Europe, and when they came over to this country, they brought those, those beliefs and ideals and values with them. The Black people, when we were brought over to this country, we really didn't have anything to identify with. And we're talking about young kids being born in this country who were born into slavery. What kind of culture is slavery? You know, so when we evolved out of slavery, we wanted to become the only thing that we knew, which was, just live like the master. We wanted to try, so we tried to, identify and be more, I guess you could say American, as you were saying, moving to the suburbs and different things. It's because we want to try to be better, and we want to try to be more, let's say, as this country would like to see us be. But we owe ourselves a responsibility. We're responsible for ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, because, when you free the slave, you free the slave owner. It's a tremendous burden for the slave owner to have to think for millions of slaves. And so I think it's both moral and practical for America to follow a policy of affirmative action, because we have to have a strong country where everybody thinks, and not just 90% of the country or 50% of the country. Blacks, Jews, white Southerners, we all have to learn to think, and we can only learn to think if we have opportunity.
Mm-hmm. This country, and despite our problems, let's face it, I wouldn't want to live anywhere else in this world. At least here, you have an opportunity to go in whatever direction you choose to go into. It's something that we worked towards and eventually got, but we're made up of a lot of different types of people. And like I said, America is only, about 300, 400 years old? When you actually think about our birthday, in comparison, let's say China or Japan and these, older kinds of countries. So we're really just starting to establish what America is really all about. And let's face it, it's made up of a multitude of ethnic groups. And eventually, and I just honestly believe that in time, racism is always going to be around, but I don't think it'll be as prevalent as it's been in the last, 20, 30 years.
Yeah. When you talk about racism, I guess I have to admit, I have a kind of a mixed bag a lot of times as to how much racism really exists in America in terms of what degree, and which is what I'm getting at. It would be like if you had a ball of worms in front of you and they were all mixed up, and you reached in and you grabbed one, you can say, yeah, I got a worm, but you don't know which one you got. And so when you begin to look at all of the social conflicts, when you begin to look at all the things, in America, all of the competition, when you look at all of the opportunity that's here, and you're not competing against each other, it just so happens that you happen to be white and I'm Black. And if you do something to me, you grab one of those worms there, you may grab the one that says racism, but in fact, racism may have been the furthest thing from your mind. It was just outright competition that happened to have been there. So my answer to that, I think we are a racially conscious society, no doubt about that. And I use kind of a narrow definition for racism in the sense that people believe that they're better because of biological, and I'm not so sure how much that is really true, as much as to say is that you and I are loyal to each other, and therefore I'm going to choose you over that guy because of the way we look. And I'm not so sure that that's racism as much as it is just racial consciousness and outright competition. It's my group versus your group. And so when I answer that question, is that racism, I said, well, what degree are we? I think, yes, there is some racism here.
I think I see what you're saying, because there's a headline in the textbook that I use that says race, thinking may make it so. In other words, you're saying in a sense that blacks tend to see everything in terms of race, whereas the complexity of the decision-making process is broader than that.
Yeah, and maybe much more than...
See, at one time, that was the reason that a lot of times things didn't happen for you, was because of your race. Right. But like I said, we've evolved from that. And now, as Charles was saying, I think we were at a point now where you're judged more on what you know and what you're capable of doing. That's why I say we're in a very dangerous time as far as black folks are concerned, because it's not so much what your race has to say about you, it's what you have learned and what you've trained yourself to do. So in a way, you can systematically eliminate yourself by not having education and not having knowledge.
This is where I think integration or desegregation can really be helpful. You see, I've learned a lot about working with different groups and about different attitudes simply because I've had a chance to participate outside of just the black community. As an example, I wanted to make a loan from a bank, one of the local banks. I wanted to do an investment. My first impression was they won't let me have that kind of money because I'm black. And I almost wrote myself off. Mm-hmm. And I said, now, wait a minute. If I were a banker, what would I want to know about you in order to loan you the money? How you gonna pay me back first? Collateral and all. And so I put out all my stuff, and I went into the bank in less than 5 minutes. I had the loan.
But let me ask Cynthia the question again. Cynthia, is it any different for black male Americans versus black female Americans? Is the problem in terms of what Charlie describes? Is it even more serious for black females?
Well, I think that what he's saying, and I understand that a lot of times, that we're dealing with the individual. You have to, at one point in time, arrive at that you have to deal with the person on an individual level. But as far as being able to really say, it's a fine line there, okay? And a lot of times, when you're, as a male, I do realize that black males do have a difficult time. I feel like that sometimes a society kind of beats them down. I would be more apt to say that a black female's role, because I know that my responsibilities, my job has. I've had a door open for me where I could get a good job. And I find it a lot of times where black women would have more of an opportunity to step inside of a door as opposed to, say, some of the black males. And I'll give you my example for saying this. I had personal experience with my family. I had brothers, and they both went out and they did the right things, as we would label it to be, went to school, graduated from the university, and even after, having a degree, they still were unable to find an opportunity to work. And this is something that our society encourages us to do. They say, well, you go out, you get your education, you get specialized in a particular field, and then come back and we'll have something there for you. Well, after they both did this, and they were still out of luck.
There's no affirmative action?
No affirmative action. So this is what I'm saying. We say on one hand, go get educated. If you do the right things, neither one of them had been in trouble. They were, as far as black community men, they were role models within the black community. Grades were good, and they were acknowledged by black people within our community as being what they would say good young men. And then they tried their way to do that here as well, but it did not work here for them. And consequently, one is gone and the other one is just, working little odd jobs and things. So I think that comparing what I've experienced and what I've seen other people experiencing here in Muncie, I do think that it doesn't always, even if you do the right things, it doesn't always work.
Is it black women can get jobs that white women get, but black men can't get jobs that white men get? I mean, is that the difference? Is it in fact women are on a different level from men to begin with?
I think that our society can cope with black women more so than they can the black male. I do believe that. I don't know. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's our smile. I don't know. You know, it makes you wonder sometimes.
Does a black man represent a threat? I mean, is that?
I wonder if
I think to a degree,
he is a threat.
Alvin Poussin said, if you read through history, it says that whenever you have an oppressor and an oppressed, it is the men of the oppressed group that get oppressed, not the women. The oppressor will oppress the men of the group. And if you have been following what's going on in China with the Africans there, it really didn't begin to have problems until the African men started dating the Chinese women. And that's when the problem began to come in. So I would say that if that generalization is true, that it is the men of the oppressed group, that then you can kind of see what's happening to the black males. They may do represent a threat. And history has shown that men of other groups too, if they were in the oppressed group, they were the one, it was the men that got oppressed, you know, as opposed to the women. And I guess as a male, women don't offer the same threat to you as men would.
And they've been, you know, historically, black women have been forced to deal with situations where the male was not working in the household or there was no male. And it's amazing that over a period of time that they were able to keep the family together, maintain the household and work. A lot of it, I think, had to do with the fact that, black males were unable to find a job, and were unable to get the kind of job. Because, see, we're very proud people, and it's something about being able to be the breadwinner that means a lot to a black male. And to be, let's say, not on that level to do that, it becomes very frustrating, which causes problems at home, and then you end up seeing males leaving and that kind of thing. So.
If I can get back to Larry's original question.
In 15 seconds.
Is America racist? White Republicans asked the question, how did George Bush treat the issue of Willie Horton? Democratic Party Dukakis Americans asked the question, how did Dukakis treat Jesse Jackson? And then asked the question, is America racist?
We still have a long way to go.
We have a long ways to go.
Thank you, John Rouse, Charles Payne, Cynthia Pierce, and Fred Williams for being with us here today and sharing your views. I'm Larry Lough. Thank you for being with us.